عفوا مسبيك شنين ما نستنى دقيقة زبالي بفنين بدنا أصوات جريئة فيش عندي منفس فيش عندي منفس
So Atalya Ben Abba is from Tel Aviv, and she was 19 years old when the film was made, which is 2 years ago?
No, 5 years ago.
Oh, it's 5 years ago. Okay, and you were 19 years old. You were about to be conscripted to the Israeli army.
Yes.
Your brother avoided the army by obtaining a psychiatric exemption before you, and he was very supportive to you. And when these 6 months you had to reflect, you joined the grassroots activist group called Tayush, who took you to the West Bank, to Hebron, where you saw what occupation really was like for the Palestinians who lived there. So throughout the film, you develop reasons for, you sort of strengthen your reasons for not wanting to join the army.
Yes.
Despite the risks of alienating friends, going to prison. And you educate yourself throughout the film, and also throughout the film, your parents educate themselves, and you influence them. And eventually your mother decides she's going to support your decision wholeheartedly. Then we see an army tribunal, which is a reconstruction of an army tribunal, where they reject your petition for recognition as a conscientious objector. And as a result, you're sentenced to prison. And in the end, you spend quite a long time there, 119 days.
110.
Excuse me?
110 days.
110 days. So my first question is going to be, this is Molly Steward's first film as director. How did she find you? How did she meet you? How did you two connect?
So I actually knew Molly for quite a long time. She and my brother had a relationship for like 6 years, and because they studied together. So she's been to our home, and she knew our family very well.
Did they study in America or in Israel?
In the US.
Yeah.
Like for my brother's BA. And then he told her that I was debating what I should do. It was just a conversation about me being unsure of what decision I want to make. And then she thought it was very interesting to sort of follow that story. So she made a short film for school, like a 15-minute long film. And it got very, very good reception. And so they got a scholarship to make it a full feature. But it was sort of this very, very personal project. Like me and Molly, we knew each other for a long time and we were very close. So it was also very natural to have her in our home and joining our dinner.
Okay, and so apart from the tribunal scene, which I mentioned, all the scenes are filmed in real time. None of them are reconstructed.
Yeah, it's
family. Okay, and so I want to talk a bit about your family, because this is very much a film about family and about sort of connecting to other people around you who don't necessarily share the same views. Have I understood correctly? And your family, your parents, your grandfather were military people, or is it they just did their military service and then were reservists?
So in Israel, everyone has to serve. So my family is not a military family. They all did their very normal service, and also only men do reserve service. Or actually, that's not true. Some women also do, but my mother didn't do reserve service. Only my father did. So it's not like we're I don't know, an abnormally militarized family. I think my family compared to other families in Israel is less militarized.
So we have these different reactions in the film, which is your grandfather is quite amusing. I think on 2 occasions he says this is silliness.
Yeah.
You know, his argument is very much post-Holocaust, and could you sort of, we have to defend ourselves, and that'll always be the case. Then your father, he's there, but he's not there in the film. It's not quite clear what his decision is towards you. And your mother fully embraces your decision, and your brother, of course, as well. Could you tell us a bit more about, did you change your grandfather's point of view? And did your father sort of remain with a slightly ambivalent feeling towards your decision?
So I did not change my grandfather's point of view. Like, I think, you know, sometimes, and I think especially for my grandfather, you know, we lived in very different times and different political realities, and like the experiences he had growing up are very different to mine. And like the power Israel currently has over the Palestinian people is very different to what he knew while being my age. He was born before Israel became like an autonomous state. So it's so different. So and I can't really, you know, affect his point of view. Like it's just like sort of the reality that he knows. So like I did not change his mind. And I think one thing that he thought that will happen to me and did not happen is that he thought that I'll have to like escape Israel, and that just didn't happen. So I guess that sort of on that perspective, like things did turn out differently than he expected. And as to my father, he's very supportive now, and I think he was just like, he's less of a camera person.
Yes.
But he was no less present in my life than my mother. It's just that he was filmed less, and like had I don't know, he's just like a more reserved person, so he had less of like a film persona, I guess.
Yeah.
But he's very, very supportive of me.
Equally supportive. And your brother is in fact co-producer and co-scriptwriter, is that right?
Yeah.
So he's very involved in making the film as well as being in it. Yeah.
As I said before, it was a very personal project. Like we didn't have anyone from like outside sort of take part in it or affect it in any way. It was like Molly, Amitai, and I sort of making this thing together. And I think my role was like more of like an object or like a subject in the film, but I would talk with Molly a lot about like editing decisions and like what I was comfortable with, what I was not comfortable with. It was like such a thing that was like very, I don't know, like there was no one from outside sort of telling us what to do or dictating our choices. It was like so personal.
Well, tell me a little bit about the going to Hebron. I mean, you say that you went to a school that was quite progressive on these issues.
Yeah.
And so maybe you had spoken to Palestinians before going to Hebron. Tell us a bit about your connection with Palestinians in Israel before the film and then after you go to Hebron.
Yeah, so I think in that sense, I had sort of like a non-conventional upbringing. I think for most Israelis, they're very disconnected from Palestinian people and they don't really have knowledge of like the lives that Palestinian people lead. But because I grew up in like in Musrara, which is like on the border between Eastern Jerusalem and Western Jerusalem, and I had like more of a, I don't know, a daily sort of connection to like the Palestinian Jerusalem.
Yes.
But still it was very segregated. Like I didn't have Palestinian friends growing up. I was just like more aware of like their existence and their humanity and their lives, but it was still mostly segregated. And I think for most Jewish Israeli people, there's a lot of segregation. Like you sort of just connect Palestinian people to fear. So people, like the area I grew up in, many people are afraid to go to. Like they won't go to the street where I grew up, because it's like too frightening, because it's with Palestinian people. And this like idea of fear is like very powerful. So I just didn't have it as much. Like I wasn't as afraid as my peers. And then going to Hebron, it was very hard. Like it was very sad, because even though I felt like I knew what Jerusalem looked like, but I didn't know what military control to that extent and what poverty to that extent looks like. And it was just like very, I don't know, it felt like it doesn't make sense. But
it was an eye-opener really for you to see the children and the houses and the poverty of the land.
Yeah, I think it's super important, like for people to understand the occupation, they really need to see it, because it's so out there, you know. It's amazing that like the Israeli government can hide it, when if you just go there, you see it very blatantly, but people don't go there.
Because they're frightened to go there, or because they're just not interested.
Because they're frightened. Yeah.
And
they feel like it's like the type of place that they don't have access to, or it's too dangerous to go to.
So how many people do actually go on these sort of tours where you meet Palestinians and you go and see their homes and so on? You think it's a very small proportion of people?
Yeah, very, very small. And also only people from like a certain socioeconomic background. Like this type of activity is not very accessible to those who are struggling themselves, you know? Yeah. So like the sort of core population of Jewish Israelis are very much disconnected from going to these areas. Like there, the segregation is way clearer. Like they're too, you know, they're too busy trying to maintain their own survival and their own lives. Like Israel economically is very difficult. Like people just don't make a lot of money, but like rent and food is super expensive.
Yes.
So the survival of people, like people are very much concerned with their own survival and their own safety. And then like going to South Hebron Hills on a tour is not even something they can imagine doing.
Yes. Yes. I also was interested in the thing you said about how nowadays, I went to school in Israel for a year, and what you say here was not at all the case. That children nowadays are prepped for the army already early on. That there's, I mean, explain a bit more about this, the sort of prepping and the mind set that children are encouraged to develop.
It's a very militarized society. So, and also because everyone enlists, you sort of like, you always have like an uncle or a brother or a cousin who's in the army. So there's always someone in the family and someone you know that will be in the army. And like, there's memorial days, and there's, since kindergarten, there will be talks, and there are children's songs about soldiers. Like it's just everywhere in the culture. It's on TV, it's in commercials, like it's just, and it's also on the street. Like you see soldiers on the street.
Yes. Or
you see people with their weapons, like with their military weapons. Do
you think there's a certain idealization?
Yeah, definitely. Like it's a very common thing to tell a child, like, oh, eat your vegetables, otherwise you won't grow strong and become a soldier. And like children would put on soldier costumes on Purim, and yeah, it's like a hero. Like the soldiers are the heroes. And I think for boys especially, it's like the idea. I remember I had a few friends who told me like growing up, they sort of had this ideal of like dying as heroes, as soldiers.
Yes, yes. The Mitzavot, the organization of young conscientious objectors.
Yeah.
Where is it now? I mean, has the movement grown? Is it very? Are you still very active in it, or tell us a bit about the movement?
So I'm not very active in it, but I'm still a little active in it, and the group is still going. Like just recently, there was a young refuser named Shachar Peretz who got. She was in the military prison, and she got an exemption a few months ago. So the movement is still going, and we had I think on 2020 or even 2021, they released a big refusal letter with more than 100 signatures of young military age people saying they refuse to enlist. But it's hard to say if the movement is growing. I mean, I think it's sort of like the same size it was when I refused.
But if I understand correctly, there are many groups of conscientious objectors, and this is one of them.
No, Misawat is like a network that connects various groups. I think there are different reasons people sort of refuse to go to the army or get out of military service. So Misawat is sort of trying to support all people from all different groups. So you have like the political refusers, or you have people that for economic reasons do not want to enlist, or you have religious people that don't want to enlist for religious reasons, but are still being forced to, and so they are being sent to military prisons.
And this military tribunal, which you reconstructed with actors, in fact, explain why they refused your appeal to be a conscientious objector. What were their reasons?
So actually the committee was after I was already in military prison. Like it was actually sort of what led to me getting an exemption at the end. Like it wasn't before, it was after. Like after I had like 4 trials, and then I was sent to prison each time, and then I had this committee, which is called the Conscientious Committee, and it's supposed to have like one philosophy professor and like soldiers, and this committee decided that I was a selective refuser, like because I wasn't like I didn't have like a general objection to violence, like I wasn't a pacifist. And I like specifically refused because I did not agree to take part in the occupation of Palestine. And so to them, this was a selective objection and not a conscientious objection. And also they pinpointed my will to sort of affect other people as something that is not allowing them to judge my objection as a conscientious objection. Because
sorry, I interrupted you. Do you think it's a fair system?
No. I think it's like a parody of like a trial, or like it's because it's so like it's made by the system for the system, like it's so inside the military and made by the military, like it could not be objective. I mean, it's made to serve them, not me. So because my objection was very political, like I knew they wouldn't accept it. Like I knew that was going to be their answer. It was very, very clear to me. And it's like a show, you know, like they made their decisions before they met me and talked to me. But the reason I wanted to go to the committee was because I knew that from that committee they could pass me on to another committee, and that is where I got my exemption, which was on account of bad behavior.
Of bad behavior?
Yeah, because I was in military prison for so long.
How has it affected your life as you would have seen it when you were, before you undertook this resistance. Has it affected you professionally? I mean, has it meant that things are closed to you that you were hoping for? Can you explain a little bit about your life now as a result of this?
Yeah. So because what I did was very planned, like I knew what the consequences are going to be. So even before refusing, I knew that the ways it was going to affect my life. So I was sort of prepared for them. Like I made just the choice not to follow certain career routes. I knew that I could not enter a government position but because I knew it beforehand, it didn't so much affect my plans, as I was just like, making the choice to walk this route of political activism and political engagement that is outside of the hegemonious sort of mind state or like the mainstream of society. Like I knew I was going to be branded as like a radical activist. And that is what happened. So I guess in that sense, it followed my expectations. And that is still what I'm doing. I'm still part of activist groups in Jerusalem. And for the past year, we've been mainly active in Sheikh Jarrah. And I'm also a university student. I've been sort of became part of an activist cell in the university. And I'm studying philosophy and sociology.
You didn't choose to study the law to sort of reinforce your...
I feel like philosophy and sociology is connected enough. Like yes. I think studying sociology allows me to like very much engage politically with what I study. And also I did like a paper on police brutality in Sheikh Jarrah, and it's like, for me, it's very connected.
Did you lose friends as a result of your decisions?
Yes, but I found others. I think I found a community of activists that I'm very close to, and we're very close friends. And I think that's sort of what works for us, is that we became this community here in Jerusalem. But when I was making the choice to object, many of my friends who went to the military, we could not stay in contact. It's just like we didn't have a shared ground for conversation anymore.
You had this no-go area, I suppose, also of where you just couldn't share your views. I mean, it was too
yeah.
And are you hopeful, Atalya, for the future of this movement and for the future of dialogue between Palestinians and Jewish Israelis? And yes,
I think I sort of feel like I have to be. I feel like I have many privileges in this struggle, being white, being Jewish, but I don't think, and I think those sort of make me more aware of my responsibilities. Yes. And like the fact that as a person with so many privileges, I have to take action, and I also have to be hopeful and continue struggling. Like I don't think it is, I don't know, I think sort of losing hope and becoming too deep in despair just won't allow me to keep struggling. So.
Well, thank you very much for the interview. Thank you.
Thank you.